Welcome to Writing and Fighting. It is May 4th, 2012. May the 4th be with you. These are my baby Yoda. I will not keep them on. This is way too serious. But this is for Gina Carano, the Mandalorian. I'm wearing a Wookiee shirt too. So I'm a nerd all the way around here. Academic, fighter, and Star Wars. So thank you. I have an amazing panel here. And I have two people I've really wanted to talk to. If I could have a dinner party before a fight, this would be Jason and Trent. I would want you there because you won't hold no punches. So first, Trent, Reinsmith.
Yeah.
Is a longtime MMA writer out of Baltimore, our neighbor, and has written for Forbes, MMA Junkie, USA Today, Vice, Bleacher Report, Showbiz Cheat Sheet, The Fairview Observer, and currently is featured on Bloody Elbow. Trent also covers such fields as animal rescue, prison, and crime stories. I'd love to hear about that too. So thank you so much for joining us, Trent.
Thank you.
Thank you. And then we also have Jason Cruz coming from us from Seattle. He is an attorney and writer. He owns Cruz Law Firm, where he practices business and trademark law. He owns and writes for MMA Payout, a website dedicated to the legal and business aspects of combat sport. He has written for the site since 2011 and took over as owner and operator in September 2019. In December 2019, he published Mixed Martial Arts and the Law, a book, and I have it right here.
Yay.
As a book focusing on the legal issues that have confronted the sport of mixed martial arts. Very, very appropriate right now. Everyone,
Yes.
You can go on Amazon. You can get it right away on Kindle, I'm sure.
Yes, you can.
Companion piece for the class. All right, let's get into it. This is kind of a theme that I'm getting. You have to take a lot of jobs.
Yeah.
It's a grind.
Yep. Yeah, it definitely is. And I would advise anybody that gets into this to be prepared for that. There's definitely folks that are established and they've been around for years and years and years, and they're not going to give up their spots. So to get one of the rare spots, you really have to grind it out, and it takes a long while.
Yeah. No, and we're going to talk more about this, about when you were a writer for a sport, about kind of having your own voice. And we've been talking about not falling into the PR trap. Mm-hmm. And, is this something that you decided early on? I'm going to have my own authenticity. I'm very curious.
I wanted to, and I did with the NHL stuff, but with the MMA thing, like many people, I started off doing the kind of, PR stuff and didn't speak too negatively about the UFC and the business side of things, because I knew the downside of that. And, Josh Gross is a perfect example of that, but he never gave up. And when I left MMA Junkie is when I decided to make that move. I thought, all right, I'm going to start this newsletter, and this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to do what I want to do. I'm going to write in my own voice. And if it takes off, it takes off. If it doesn't, it doesn't. It's done okay, but I think the big change came when Bloody Elbow called me back up. And because it's much bigger to write for a site like that than to do your own newsletter. And I think that's really when it got noticed, and when I got the quote unquote attention.
Yeah.
Whether good or bad, you have to decide.
I love it. So yeah, you talked about there's this kind of breakthrough moment. Can you talk more about, was it a certain article that you wrote, or was it kind of a buildup of a series?
It was, I just wasn't happy. I knew I wasn't right. I mean, I enjoyed writing about MMA, but I wasn't writing what I wanted to. And I wanted to be, I guess adversarial would be an okay word for it, but I wanted to look deeper, and I didn't want to toe the company line. I saw that kind of writing kind of suited me, and there were very few people doing it. And I just decided to take a chance. Tim Burke, who had been with Deadspin for a long time, has a consulting position now for podcasting and things like that. And I called him. He gave me some great advice, and put me on the right track. And so from wanting to do it and talking to Tim, that's really what launched me to what I'm doing now.
Yeah. And yes, so fellow podcaster, how many episodes are you on? And it's called, can you tell us the name of it?
It's called Come On Now. And I've been doing it daily, so I'm close to 50. And last week, Bloody Elbow picked it up, and we're doing what we're calling a best of, where I just kind of compile the best moments from the week, put them into an hour-long podcast, and Bloody Elbow is putting that up on Wednesdays now.
Ah, congratulations.
Thank you.
Yes. So can you describe your format? It sounds like it's your voice, Trent,
Yeah.
and then you have guests? Or are you going to have guests?
I do not have guests. I'm thinking about it, but mostly it's just my take on what's going on that day. If something pops into my head, I'll discuss it. If the news is important, I'll discuss that. But yeah, it's pretty much what's going on that day, day-to-day business.
Got it. Well, you've had a lot to talk about.
Yes.
So, and I think that you'll find stuff as we go on. All right, well, I'm going to bring Jason in, and I'm going to kind of toss the same question out.
Okay.
The legal field. Were you one of those kids who argued a lot and then said, this is my dream, or please tell us?
No, I did not. And I actually, but I actually ended up that way. I originally I went to law school because I wanted to go into sports law. I wanted to be an agent, and I realized how hard it was to do. And so after I graduated from law school, I took a job like regular people practicing law, and always still wanted to do it. So I knew that there was a lot of obstacles in that. So I thought about what's the next best thing, and perhaps going into writing about sports. So in about 2001, I picked up a freelance job with the Northwest Asian Weekly here in Seattle. It's a local community paper. And I just started writing about whatever they wanted me to cover. So that's how it kind of started. And I still kept my job as practicing law. And then I just told them, hey, I wanted to cover more sports. So it was helpful. I think the one big thing that happened was that a guy by the name of Benson Henderson was an up-and-coming fighter in the area. He grew up in Federal Way, Washington, and they needed somebody to interview him. So I got the chance to interview Benson Henderson, and then from there, I got to interview a guy by the name of Mark Munoz, UFC light heavyweight. And then it just started to grow. I still did other unrelated articles and things like that. But I also tried to focus more on sports. And in 2011, an ad came up for MMA Payout for a writer. And so I only had my clip of Benson Henderson, and that was it. And then I had a couple of articles I thought was good. Send it to a guy by the name of Adam Swift, who, for those that don't know, Adam Swift is a big shot television executive at the time, that was the head proprietor of the website MMA Payout. MMA Payout was owned by HD Net LLC, and the tie-in there is Mark Cuban owns HD Net LLC. So anyway, I was writing for. I got the job. I don't know how, but I got the job, and I started writing from them in 2011, and then in 2019, the company was purchased, and so I told Adam, "Hey, if you guys aren't going to do anything with the website, I'll take it," and he said, "Okay." And then a peaceful transfer of power occurred. And I took over MMA Payout. But throughout those years, I was able to evolve as how to cover the sport, because one of the things that I really enjoyed about the sport of MMA is the accessibility of its fighters. Maybe not now, but earlier on in the times, you could find out a fighter's email address or text them or text a coach, and you could get some information from them. They would be readily accessible. There were no PR obstacles or anything like that. And yes, there was a lot of PR stories, and you know, I'm not as adverse to them as maybe say Trent is, but like, you know, that's we'll cover it if it's something of notice, but we'll put our own spin on it. I also had back in what was it, 2014 or 15, a friend of mine, Dr. Ryan Rodenberg, who's a professor at Florida State University, we went to law school together, introduced me to somebody by the name of Paul Gift, who is an economics professor at Pepperdine. And he was into mixed martial arts at the time as well. And so a couple years later, Paul reached out to me, and he was thinking about doing a podcast with a guy by the name of John Nash. A lot of people know who John Nash is. And that's how Show Money became involved. So I do a podcast. It's supposed to be monthly, but the guys are so just, you know, you know who John, most people who follow MMA know who John Nash is. So he's always on the podcast. Paul is kind of elusive, but whenever we get sit down and we do a podcast based on the business and legal aspects of MMA, and it's really evolved into something interesting. And it's something, for some reason, a lot of people will chime in and say, "Hey, I listened to that," and so that's been really great for me as in terms of growth in communicating in this kind of area. And then the book that came out in December was kind of a culmination of my what I've done with MMA Payout, which is cover legal issues in mixed martial arts. So that was one of the funner things I've done, because the book was already written, because I just had to kind of go back into a lot of my posts and things like that. But you know, it was just kind of finding a publisher and things like that. And I remember there was one publisher that wanted to publish it, and then they just kind of forgot that they gave me the go ahead, and then I had to go to another publisher, and then that worked out. And it's funny because the length of time, and this is something interesting for your writers, the length of time from when you submit the final transcript to when it gets published is so long, and you're just waiting, and you're like your friends and everything, like, when's that book coming out? Did the book come out? I didn't know. The book's coming out. The book's coming out. You know, it's one of those things. I'm sure your writers will maybe not look forward to that, but like, it's one of those you know, waiting sessions, and you just kind of worried and like, well, hopefully the publisher doesn't cancel and things like that. So.
Oh, I understand, especially when you're working on a very timely piece.
Yes.
You know, I'm sure there were, by the time it published, you wish you could have added a few chapters.
Exactly. And then I'll tell you a quick little funny story. Two things. One, I couldn't update a couple things regarding the antitrust lawsuit, and I couldn't update my chapter on Mark Hunt. But the funny thing was that is that in September, when they were finally printing out, the copy editor found one sentence that was duplicated on 2 pages. So like, I had something happen. So like, she said, okay, well, I don't, it's on page 140 of 200 and something page book. We don't want to repaginate everything. So can you come up with about 45 words to fill in there?
And could you? I think you did.
I did. I could figure it out, but like when you read the email about 45 words, you have to go back into like where you're writing and like, what was I thinking at the time? And I don't want to write something that duplicates something again. So that's kind of oh, wow. Yeah, one of those author logistics.
Underlining, you got to put in the Mark Hunt. Speaking of Mark Hunt, is that still ongoing, or was that thrown out of the court?
So he has an appeal. So his appeal with the UFC, where he sues Zuffa and Dana White, is actually still ongoing. The appeal, I mean, so it was dismissed by the trial court, and now it's at the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals. And so he has filed his briefing, and Zuffa and Dana White have requested an extension of time to file theirs until, I think, later this month. So that is still ongoing. So what he said recently regarding wanting to sue again, I'm not sure what that's all about.
Yeah, yeah. And just to bring up, now we're getting into it. We're going into issues and stuff like that. But to bring people up to speed on Mark Hunt, he sued the UFC Zuffa because he believed that by having, I believe it was Trent, or no, I'm sorry, Trent, Brock Lesnar. I don't know why your name popped in there, Trent. I think of you as this huge, massive specimen. Brock Lesnar had, they knowingly put him in a fight, and that it was considered racketeering.
Well, what it was is that Hunt had the theory that the UFC purposely allowed fighters to fight with the knowledge that they were taking performance enhancing drugs. And so he came up with several instances in which fighters were allowed to do this. And, you know, it just so happened like three straight fighters tested positive for performance enhancing drugs that Mark Hunt fought. I think the fourth one, Frank Mir actually asked for TUE, an exemption or something like that. But so he did bring up some sort of RICO law because there were two federal offenses, and so that was a unique theory of the case. But the courts essentially said that, you know, there was nothing that was out of the ordinary that Lesnar did within that ring to cause him damages, and then his damages were, I guess. The argument was the damages were not directly related to what happened.
Fascinating. Well, and I have to remind people, I'm a literature professor, so if I have my facts wrong, you know, this is a forum, discussion zone. So for educational purposes, do not take my word. But Jason's an attorney, so you can leave it on him. But no, we've got someone coming here. So I would like to go, let's go with USADA, because I was talking to a colleague, Kyle Green, who's a professor of sociology at SUNY Brockport. And he brought up this really interesting fact that in times of crisis, and there are two things actually I want to talk about this. Sometimes the false narratives that we have in business and in society actually get exposed. And one of those is the idea that USADA, that the UFC really cares, and it does it in a thoughtful manner. And this is coming up with what we're doing with having UFC during this pandemic, set this Saturday, you know, in just 6 days, or less than that, 5 days. Do you think USADA can actually do their job when fighters are quarantined and, you know, and what do you think of the state of USADA? I'll plus it out. Trent, do you want to chime in? Sure.
At first, I was a huge supporter of the drug testing policy. I thought it was a great idea. I've slowly changed my mind on that. And you've talked to Luke Thomas, right?
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Luke is one who's very much against the USADA policy. I've started out for it, but I'm not as hardline against it as Luke, because I think drug testing should still be done, but I think USADA might not be the correct choice, because they're, you know, paid by the UFC, and I think that opens up a lot of doors to question who they really work for and what their purpose is. And the handling of the suspensions has been all over the place, which is frustrating. And if I was a fighter and like For instance, I think Tom Lawler
Mahler.
tested positive for ostarine and got a 2-year suspension, I believe, or maybe longer.
Yes, 2 years.
And now there's folks on ostarine, same kind of situation, and they're getting 6 months or less. And Lawler never got an apology, never got anything reworked, and it more or less forced him out of MMA and into professional wrestling. I think he might be getting back into some MMA, but I'm not sure. But I just don't like the way it's been handled. There's a lot of weird things going on. I don't like that Jeff Nowitzki's involved with the UFC. I think his involvement is, they like to put him as that he's trying to help the fighters. I don't believe that. I think he's trying to help the UFC, which, okay, but don't paint him as a helper of the fighters. So I have a lot of issues with USADA. But like I said, I do think they should be drug testing, but I don't think USADA should be doing it. And I don't think USADA should be drug testing during a pandemic either. And I've brought this up, and I think I've wrote about it or spoke about it on the podcast, that there's no way for them to do it safely, because when they gave their statement on it, they said they would do it as safely as they could, and they would use PPE when available. And if you're testing blood and urine during normal circumstances, you should be using PPE. During a pandemic, it's even more vital. So unless they can do it safely at this time, I don't think they should be testing, because it's a risk to their workers and also to the fighters. But big picture, not the biggest fan of USADA right now, but I still support some type of drug testing.
Thank you, Trent. And yeah, and it's so funny. USADA is only like one part of this whole COVID thing that's going on. You know, I think there are other safety things that I'm still questioning, but it is interesting to think of it in the long term. And bringing up Tom Lawler, you know, we also showed how much they enforced when they wanted to. Then when John Jones and the pictograms, those could be pulsing in and out. You know, it's funny when you hear about the pictograms and then it's why they come in and out. It's you know, I'd love to know the science behind that.
Yeah.
And the other thing was when we had Nate Diaz for his MF belt, and how he had something, and right away, because they did not want to lose that fight, you saw it back down, and there was a regulation change. So, you know, I think so. And Jason, I'd love to know your thoughts on USADA, but we have so much to cover. But
I think it's drug testing is good, and I think that that something like USADA should occur. But I think, as we point out, the unevenness of the administration of these cases, you know, and the relative unfairness. Now, Tom Lawler is a great case because he did go. I mean, so he was going to be in the next season of Fighters League, Pro Fighters League, Professional Fighters League, but it took him, you know, a couple of years away, and he didn't have the money to fight USADA on this, and there are a lot of detailed issues related to Jessica Pene's another issue where she was flagged, and she felt like she was kind of herded into admitting and brokering some sort of settlement. And there are a lot of issues with the administration of it. And while drug testing is important, because you don't want to have somebody in there that's using performance enhancing drugs against someone who isn't, you wonder if there can be an evolution of the rules and how things are tested. And again, like we bring up the Nate Diaz, the John Jones, those are situations where, hey, USADA was able to act swiftly. I mean, they moved the fight from Vegas to California for John Jones. I mean, so they're able to figure these things out. And you see Jeff Nowitzki chumming it up on the UFC embedded, and I don't know Jeff Nowitzki from whoever. But you know, you just wonder, like, you know, are there a different set of rules for certain fighters versus you know, its stars? That's the thing that's the big concern.
Yeah. All right. This is so great, and I think let's just move into you know, in case people aren't aware, UFC is supposedly going to make its pay-per-view return, UFC 249 on May 9th in Jacksonville, Florida's VyStar Veterans Memorial Arena. It's been so amazing for my students to watch this play out for our semester. And so that's another thing that they're like, we have to continue, Professor Kidder, because we could have seen this whole arc of crazy situations. Not only will they have that on the 9th, they will quickly follow with 2 more shows, May 13th and 16th. Another event is tentatively scheduled to be announced on May 23rd. The Florida State Boxing Commission is sanctioning these fights and supposedly will enforce safety protocols. I'd love to hear how they're going to possibly do this if you have any thoughts. Obviously, no audience. All right. What is the plan? When are the fighters supposed to show up? Can I go with that? Trent, do you know?
I think they're going to handle this as a normal event. So they'll probably start trickling in, you know, maybe today, but definitely I would think early to the middle of the week they start arriving. Now they're not going to have as many media events, so maybe they arrive later because it's still a United States event, so there's not the concern of jet lag for most of them.
Yeah.
So I think, yeah, around this time and probably through Monday through Wednesday, I would guess they're going to arrive.
And this is what I'm thinking. In a pandemic, what we've been talking about, you do not want a mass people coming from all different places into one area. Now, they say they're going to be doing social distancing and, you know, having people in their own rooms. John Anik was at our class on Thursday saying that they're going to have tables, that he's not going to be at the same table with Joe Rogan or DC. They're going to be spread out on their own table around the octagon. I still can't, the math does not work here in terms of how they're going to have the cameraman, the referee, the judges, corners, all of this is a gathering. This is definitely more than 10 people. Trent, have you heard, like, you say they're going to treat it as a regular event. How are they going to make it so that it's more safe?
I don't know. And that's my biggest problem. They're being very vague with what they're saying.
Yes.
They're saying screening and testing, but screening could mean a questionnaire. Mm-hmm. Testing could mean the normal testing that they do for any event, and Florida requires blood tests, and I think that's it they require the HIV, those kind of tests, bloodborne pathogen tests are required, and a normal physical. Florida is a commission that is not as robust in their testing requirements pre-fight as, say, California, Nevada, New Jersey, or Ohio. Those are probably the top of the line. So that vagueness makes me very nervous that they're doing anything above and beyond the normal testing. Maybe they're going to do infrared temperature checks, but I talked to Dr. Zach Binney, and the New York Times has also reported these. They are, well, I wouldn't say useless, not very helpful, because they're just temperature checks and they don't really tell you anything. And if someone does have a temperature, they could be taking, you know, over-the-counter drugs to reduce that temperature. So if they could be carrying, but who knows? So temperature checks are insufficient. I don't know how you social distance a referee. I don't know how you social distance a corner. The fighters are obvious. So I don't know. We don't know any details. That's what bothers me the most. And I wish they would say, this is our plan A to Z. Here it is.
And do you think they're deliberately being vague and not transparent because people like us, let's just be honest, would kind of just be like, this is unacceptable. So if you're vague, no one really knows what's going to happen. There can't be any judgment or reaction.
I do. I think I think that's a lot of it because Dana White has said over and over during this whole time, he's not telling the media anything because inferring that we want these fights to be shut down, which is entirely untrue. We want fights to go on. We want them to be safe. What we don't want is fighters going out there and catching coronavirus and transporting that around. If it was just the fighters, and this is a stance I've taken, if it was just the fighters endangering themselves, I don't have a problem with that. But that's two people that sign a contract to do what they do. But the whole travel thing, not testing, that's where you bring in the general population. You can infect your family, infect a random person in the airport. I think that's where I draw the line. If it's two people, fine. Outside of that, I have a big problem with it. And I just don't understand why they won't own up to what they're going to do. If it's vague, we're still going to find out at some point. I would rather know ahead than after. And I don't like it. Another thing I don't like is the 3 fights, boom, boom, boom.
Yeah.
Doesn't give you a chance to see if someone's gotten the coronavirus.
Yeah.
I would take 1 fight, take a 2-week period after that, retest those guys and see what happens. But yeah, this is not good.
Agreed, Trent. And also I'm thinking about the influx of people, different people, again, from different areas. We're talking California, New York, all these different places coming in 3 different times, this area to whatever hotels they're at. And it just seems completely opposite from what most experts and health professionals are telling us. And also opposite of what other sports are doing at this time. You mentioned the PFL, and Jason, I want to chime in, get your thoughts on this. The PFL, they just canceled their season, and I want to know why. Like, did they do it because they had less to lose? And this is where I really want to talk about the business side of what's really happening. We also see Bellator I think they're delayed till July, and other sports organizations. Obviously, they're team-based. They also have unions, and they're still negotiating something, but it's looking way down the line. Now, Jason, I want to hear, please, because I don't think many viewers, let's take them through like Endeavor. How is that connected to UFC and the Disney ESPN role?
Okay, well, Endeavor, it owns the UFC, or is the parent company of the UFC, and they are the ones that purchased the UFC. They were actually WME IMG, but then they become Endeavor. That's neither here or there. But they're the overarching company that owns the UFC. Endeavor was going to have an IPO that come out in the September of last year, and that was based on a lot of hope. And that they're all of their different, they own the PBR, they own several other entities, all of them kind of in the entertainment services region. They have talent, they have a talent agency as well. But when they took their what they call road shows, when they go to all the investors and see if they want, they're going to invest, it wasn't very favorable. They looked at the balance sheets, and a lot of the investors, basically looking at the balance sheets, they were highly leveraged, meaning they were in heavy debt. They're living on debt. Just to think, if you had credit cards upon credit cards, and they're saying we're going to get more credit cards to pay off those credit cards, and those credit cards are going to be, so anyway, that's what you could think. At the time, the markets were gracious with the loans and everything like that, because the debt markets were very favorable at that time, because we didn't know a pandemic was going to happen. The UFC was one of the bigger revenue generators for Endeavor. 2019 marked a huge year for the UFC. They had the ESPN deal. I think to talk about ESPN, they went into the business with the UFC as the sole exclusive pay-per-view operator in 2019. That had helped the ESPN Plus digital platform flourish. So they were very happy. I mean, because of the content, a lot of the content that UFC was producing equated to a lot of subscribers for ESPN Plus. And in fact, in the ratings, in an earnings call, Disney noted that. And which is kind of a big thing. It's like the professor is telling the class that they have a star pupil. It's the UFC, the star pupil. And so one of the big things that happened in early January was that there was a huge dividend payment that the UFC sent out to its investors. I think it was like 300 million. 300 million. It was huge. It was something along that line. And the big question was, you know, why are they sending out this huge dividend payment when they are, you know, in arrears? They have a lot of high debt. We have issues with. It's come out. The antitrust lawsuit came out where 18%. The UFC was paying fighters 18% of their overall revenues. So you know, there is a lot of issues related to that. Now comes out the fact that Endeavor decided not to do its IPO because of the high leverage, and here comes the pandemic closing out all of their entities, and so they had announced layoffs and shutdowns and furloughs and things of that nature, which at the same time the UFC wanted to come back. So you could make the inference that the UFC was needed to produce revenue. I mean, it's what in the business of law you say is circumstantial evidence. It's not direct evidence, but you could kind of make the inference that, hey, at a time when the parent company is in need of money, the UFC is trying to make money for them. Yeah. The Wall Street Journal reported that their contract this year, if the UFC makes their purported amount of required events for ESPN, they will get $750 million. There's no indication what happens if they don't. I don't necessarily know, but now you kind of get the understanding why. At this point, they only have 7 events, so you get the understanding why they're doing 3 consecutively. And because they got to get back up to speed to make it through the end of the year, or else you'll see a whole bunch of events during Christmas. So that in a nutshell is what's going on with UFC. The UFC in itself, the business, is doing well. That's why Dana had come out and said, you know, no one's getting laid off. The UFC is doing well because Endeavor needs the UFC. The UFC is in a great place as far as the company's structures, that they are much needed. So they're going to get as an adequate amount of help from the parent company if there's need. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you for filling us in, because I also want to talk about what happened at the tribal lands. The Tochi Palace. Am I saying that?
Tachi Palace. Yeah.
Tachi Palace, and how that was actually, you know, these companies, the parent company of ESPN, getting pressured from the government saying you cannot do this, even though it's part of what it would be on their network. And so they had to, I guess Dana White said, stand down. So I'd like to talk to that, but I also wanted to ask, you brought up a good point about this holding company is the one that needs the revenue because they are in debt. UFC is doing fine. Now, if Endeavor, because they're not getting money from their other entertainment clients, correct?
Not doing well. Yeah.
So if they fault on their loan, would they have to sell the UFC? Would it be liquidated? I mean, are these things that could happen?
Oh, wow. I don't think that the UFC would get sold. There is a portion of the contract there where the UFC could do its own IPO at a certain date. But will Endeavor liquidate the UFC? Probably not, because it's their key asset. I mean, I don't know. I don't think Endeavor is going under, like they're going into Chapter 11. But it wouldn't be something that I would think that they would do just because of what it would mean for the rest of its entities and the unraveling of it. Because, you know, so if you were to think this out, you know, if they were sold to, say, Fox or something like that, they would immediately go back to Fox, and the ESPN, the digital platform, would have a huge gap of space because that UFC content would be no more.
Yeah. So then, Trent, I want to get your info. Thank you, Jason.
Yeah.
It's amazing to get all the pieces and that you know these contracts so well. What is the exigence that you say that Endeavor, like if they don't make their 42 fights and ESPN does not pay, what are the ramifications? Or, I mean, is that, Jason, like that, it's probably not the ramifications of if they decided we're just going to do the safe thing, that would be that they would not be able, Endeavor does not have the income to pay off their debts. But you're thinking it's likely that they wouldn't have to liquidate.
Oh no, I don't think I don't think that Endeavor would let go of the UFC. I mean, it's there would be no. I don't see a scenario. You could quote me on this now. Yeah, I don't see a scenario where they were to liquidate the UFC, and I don't think that they could at this point. You know, it would be interesting to see what would have happened if the UFC just decided, you know, hey, we're just going to hold off on events for our health and safety of our fighters until further notice. You know, what exactly would there be? Would there be pressure from Endeavor to say, you know, hey, you got to put on events, or would UFC, they say, okay, we understand, we'll wait until the fall or something like that. My take is that there is internal pressure to put on these events for the fact that there is financial issues. You know, there are financial issues. So I mean, I don't foresee a scenario in which the Endeavor would actually let go of the UFC unless it was a dire situation, and I don't think that's going to happen.
And so the other possibly, because I'm trying to because we're trying to figure out what is this need to put it on people, and I'd like your thoughts on this about Dana White. He's a renegade. This is how he made the UFC. You watched UFC 1, or that was not Dana White, but he embodies this ethos of we're gonna rebel. The other side too is ESPN. I think I saw on Twitter today that they're going to start showcasing Korean baseball. That's getting started up again because cable providers are now pressuring that they will not pay ESPN because there's no content. Who are there other entities other than we've talked Endeavor? What else may be the pressure?
I think for UFC the pressure is probably solely from Endeavor. Because like Jason said, if the UFC doesn't deliver, I think it'll save ESPN money in the long run, because I'm going to guess that they're not going to have to pay the full 150, whatever they'll have to pay is whatever they'll have to pay, but it won't be the full 750, I'm guessing. So I think the pressure is really solely coming from Endeavor. Otherwise, maybe Disney and ESPN wouldn't have stepped in for the California fight. I mean, technically, they could have pulled off the California fight if they wanted to, because they were overseeing it themselves, which they do when they go to certain places overseas. They regulate themselves based on the Nevada State Athletic Commission rules. So technically they could have pulled that fight card off if they wanted to, but it would have left, it surely would have created a rift there between ESPN, Disney, and the UFC, which no one wants. But I think most of the pressure, if not all the pressure, is coming from Endeavor. But there's also Dana White's statements over and over that he wants to be the first one back, which he can do because, like you said, there's no union saying this is what we want to see to make our athletes safe. And then there would be requirements that the union could say, we're not coming back until these requirements are met. Nothing like that with the UFC fighters who are independent contractors. So they have no rights, really. They have no OSHA backup. There's no one they can go to for support. So they're in a bind. If Dana White says we're fighting, their only option is to say, I don't feel comfortable, then they don't get paid.
Yeah.
So they're in a tight spot. So most of the pressures from Endeavor, but there's also Dana White's ego and hubris that he wants to be the first one back.
Yeah. And I'm so.
Hey, Nancy. Sorry, Nancy.
Yes.
Hi from Europe. I wanted to throw my hat as someone who was running a company that was heavily leveraged, not as much as Endeavor. We never had 2 billion in debt, but the pressure is surely from them, but not as you may expect, because they want to drive more income from the UFC at the moment. They are desperately probably working towards restructuring their debt right now, which has more direct impact on their future. But while doing so, keeping the lights on, so showing that their core asset is still running, so that they can get better terms. That would be because we had to do that in my company. We had to protect our key asset and keep it running while we were being circled by vultures who are basically here to offer us the worst possible interest rates. So I think that's what they're doing right now. That's only my humble opinion.
Thank you. And we'd love to see you if you can, but
this is a memo to myself to watch the episode 5 tonight. Just to remind myself
it's a very good episode, bud.
Yes.
No spoilers.
Oh yeah.
Your grading on a plane of everything is so good. But Stephane, can you introduce yourself? He is coming from Barcelona.
I live in Barcelona. Yeah.
Yes, we've met from his love of fight writing. Yes, and can you explain? So you've done this kind of.
I mean, I still have shares in the company that went through the 2008 crunch shortly after leveraging. So we were in debt, and suddenly the market went through a speed bump, and you're tempted to think, oh, maybe they're going to sell their asset, or that's the last thing you do. Is that you keep your asset until the last minute, and then you try to improve your financial liabilities. And right now, I'm sure they have quarterly or monthly repayments to make, and they can't face them. But I also know that there's a lot of people who are looking at this with interest. We're going to approach them with terrible deals. So they're going to do everything they can to mitigate that and say, no, look at the new pay-per-view card that we had. It was actually X% higher than expectation. So they're experimenting, but they're not counting on the UFC to bring the cash in to save them from the potential bankruptcy. Other people will volunteer to help them, so to speak.
Stephane, thank you. This is so interesting. Okay, I have another in the weeds kind of legal question. And again, I'm a literature background, so I ask these questions oh, would they ever be sold? Because I don't know what you.
It's a good question, though. No.
Oh, well, thank you. But we understand they got to keep that, to safeguard. What happens? Is there a chance? Because let's talk about Fight Island, which we keep hearing. We heard from John Anik, from John Gooden, Robin Black, that it's real. Another secret, Trent, that no one knows where. Esther Lynn, she said, people were starting to wonder if it might be off Scotland or something, because, it was so vague. But then I think it's going to be on a beach, was something that Dana White had said. So one idea I thought from a legal aspect was, is this a ploy by Dana White to show ESPN that he is doing everything he can, that he is meeting the terms? It is just the government and other obstacles, when the fighters can't get visas for Fight Island or something. Could he say, ESPN, I've done everything, it's not my fault? Are there any kind of ways of still getting the contract?
You're talking about a lawsuit. Yes. So there are several, since this coronavirus issues shut down a lot of businesses, there's a lot of small businesses are looking into their contracts as far as a force majeure clause, which basically is an act of God. So if they have to look into the weeds of the terms of the agreement to see if there's any way out of their agreement, finding an out, so to speak. There's also in contract, there's something called the frustration of purpose or impracticability, which essentially means we're unable to exercise the term. We weren't able to go through with the terms of our position because we were blocked in some unforeseen, impossible way, meaning the government precluded us from running the event. They shut us down. There was no way to fly in all of our flighters because of immigration issues at the time because of the exigent situations. Things of those natures are issues that can be raised in which the UFC can say to ESPN, hey, look, we did our best to put on the requisite amount of fights, but we just couldn't because of all these issues that faced us. What will ESPN say? They'll probably say, no. You have to, the terms of the contract said 42 or 35 fights, and you didn't come through. You made the attempt with 3 fights in, X weeks of May, these many in June, those kind of things, and say, that if you didn't make it, UFC, you didn't make it. And we love the Fight Island, but you didn't put enough fights on to make the contract. So sorry, we can't, we're not going to give you the full amount. Obviously, since they are partners, the UFC has benefited from ESPN. ESPN has benefited from UFC. They could probably broker a deal in which they could meet in the middle. But as Nancy alluded to, you could essentially see a lawsuit from either the UFC for breach of contract or ESPN Digital saying, hey, we want a declaratory judgment, basically just confirming that, hey, the contract was not fulfilled, so we don't have to pay UFC. I don't, that's just worst case scenario for both companies. There are obviously issues with insurance. What would insurance? What kind of insurance do the entities have, and will they pay? One thing that we are seeing at this point is a huge amount of lawsuits starting to churn out, and more during the summer about a lot of insurance companies denying their coverages. So whether or not some of these things are covered due to the pandemic is something we'll see ongoing.
It'll be interesting. Yeah, pandemic insurance. I think Wimbledon actually had it.
They did. They did have it. And you have to actually look at the terms of what does it cover? Is it cover actual a pandemic? Does it say pandemic? And what's the definition of a pandemic? That kind of thing. Yeah. But yeah, Wimbledon did have it. Yes.
Can I jump in with something real quick, Nancy?
Yeah, please.
By the way, thank you guys. This is utterly fascinating. Especially I really like this perspective from both of you in the sense that one of you from a legal perspective is dealing with these codified truths that we're all sort of forced to work with, right? And then on the other side, we have this enigma of a set of conditions in the world. And then we have this fight promotion that's pressing on, willfully for whatever reason, amidst a set of truths that, are being contested or willfully ignored or whatever with respect to the coronavirus. So I love this contrast. I can't help, and I just wanted to posit this as a theory, not that this is one of those things where nobody's asking for my opinion, so I'm just going to offer it. I have a theory, and maybe somebody else has already talked about this, but I think that I think that no matter what happens with the UFC and ESPN and all of the outcomes of all this, the UFC is, I've worked for some maniacal CEOs that are under a lot of pressure to deliver that are just as pressured by their own ego as they are the financial, the board or the investors or whatever. I mean, Dana, and from a writing perspective, Nancy, I mean, I think that Dana is like in this incredible sort of prismatic kind of spot in the middle of all this. But I think that the Fight Island, my theory here is that whatever the ultimate fighter was to launch a new sort of iteration of the UFC to the masses back when, I think that Fight Island is going to be the next. It's going to be what replaces that as the reality show, and it's going to be the thing that whether they win with ESPN or fail or whatever, I mean, they're going to keep going, right, one way or the other. And this is what I think could be. We could be setting the stage perfectly for their salvation coming. Fight Island might be the salvation of the UFC. Just putting it out there.
Okay, I need some responses here, Trent, because as you say, Brian, beachfront property with a what is it, trauma-free, or hospital supposedly. Trent, what are your feelings?
I don't disagree with that. I think it would save them money in the long run. The idea here is that the Fight Island concept is going to be for international fights. And then they will oversee themselves, which, okay, that's normally what they do in overseas fight cards anyway, so that's fine. But if everything's in one location, that makes everything much easier for the UFC to maintain and control, and they can stage everything out and just let it sit. They don't have to have that much travel. They're not figuring out travel to wherever, but they're just going there and going home. And then they just bring the fighters to there. So my big concern is the medical facilities there. If they're established, what they can handle, if they're planning for the absolute worst. And if they are doing that, then Fight Island is a great idea. And it will, if the UFC can also get the Apex Center up in Nevada, that makes things even easier on that front, because then everything's there. Because they don't need, right now, they not only don't need, they can't have fans. So why not just have these two places and everything is going to go through there and do it that way for at least till 2021.
Or like until there's a vaccine, right?
Right. Yeah. Well, I'd say till there's the vaccine. Because once you start bringing crowds in, you can't, the amount of control that's required there is ridiculous. You can't stop people from moving this different seats. You can't control if there are concession lines, bathroom lines, exit and entrance. It's just too much risk for having any amount of crowd, I think. So I don't think you see a crowd until there is a vaccine. But the Apex is tiny. I think there's a couple hundred people, maybe 1,000. So could something be worked out there? Maybe. But yeah, if they hold events in just the Apex in Vegas, if Nevada approves the fights there and the Fight Island, it's a fantastic idea as long as everything's set up for medical care.
By the way, side note, in terms of the linguistics, just the idea that it's the Apex Center, I just can't get past that sorry.
Well noted. Thank you. We need the linguistic side perspective on that. Does anyone need to go? I just have I have a few more burning questions. Are we okay to go a little longer?
Yeah, we're good. Yeah.
Okay, great. First of all, do you think that this will go on Saturday? Do you think that what are your the UFC 249? Do you think it's an 80% chance?
It's a go. It's going to happen.
Huh?
I think so. I think I like to use the term canary in a coal mine. If you guys know what that term is, coal miners used to bring canaries into the coal mines, and they would sing until they died, and that's when you knew the carbon monoxide was there. So we are canaries in the coal mine. We're just going to figure it out as we go along, and if something happens, as Dana White so aptly kind of to paraphrase what Dana White put. I hope that there are safeguards there. As Trent pointed out, the fact that they didn't come out initially and say we're testing everybody leaves cause to concern. But you know, the state of Florida has already given it a go. Sports are essential, so I don't see any, and the commission has already approved it. So I don't foresee anybody else stopping it unless me and Trent can tell everybody today. No, I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. No, I'm just kidding. No, I'm just kidding. I'd like to see the fights, but I think I also speak for Trent, is like, we'd like to see safety measures for these guys. So yes, it is going to happen. I would like to hear someone tell me that after the fights, they're going to stay there for 2 weeks to be quarantined, self-quarantined, and go back. But I don't think that's going to happen.
Yeah. Trent, is it going to happen?
Yeah, I think it will. Unless something, I don't know what would stop it, unless maybe somebody getting there and being tested, if they are testing and that person has COVID-19, maybe that'll stop it. But even then, if they can say that, all right, we removed this person from the location and everybody else is okay. But yeah, I think it's going to happen. I don't think they're going to quarantine afterwards, which is a concern, which is also a concern in the fights on the 13th and 16th. I don't like it. I would like to see a full testing plan, like I said, but they're not going to deliver that. So I do think it's going to happen. And they'll just keep motoring on, I think, until, I don't know. I just think once it's opened, unless something disastrous happens, it's going to stay open.
Yeah. How do you guys think it will be the only live sport? I mean, other than, I don't know if Korean baseball is on Saturday night. The only live sport. Okay, this is 2 questions. How do you think the pay-per-view is going to do? And this is something interesting that a student sent to me. With all of us becoming much more attuned to Zoom and video sharing, will there be a lot more people stealing the pay-per-view by doing something like this, where they share a screen? And is that something that might affect with the piracy, which is always a problem? I'll go to Jason first.
You know, that's a good question. I hadn't thought about, well, I hadn't thought about that aspect. I think that the prelims on ESPN, the free prelims, will do well. Whether or not, I think the pay-per-view will just do as it usually does. So what you know, 300, maybe 300,000 buys, maybe. I think the one thing that you have to consider is the unfortunate nature of this pandemic also means that a lot of people are unemployed. So they probably won't flip the $70, 65, $70 for this pay-per-view. They will definitely tune in, I mean, for prelims on ESPN. As for the piracy, yeah, I think that I don't know. Yeah, I don't know how the UFC has, if they have thought about how to deal with those types of piracy issues. They have, you know, one of the things we talk about in my book is that how they've gone beyond the, you know, above and beyond in trying to combat pay-per-view pirates. I don't know for this one, you know, for this pay-per-view, they might just let it go just so people can see it. Who knows? I mean, they may still try to figure out how to work around the Zoom and the YouTube and stuff. They have shut down people who've had their cell phones up at events and things like that. So
Yeah, I know. Trent, what do you think? How is the pay-per-view going to be?
I agree with Jason. The event that they had in Brazil, which was during the afternoon, but it had no crowd, and it was the only sports thing going on at that time. It did less than average numbers on, I forget what it was on. I think it was on ESPN and ESPN2.
They put it everywhere. Yeah.
Yeah, and it granted, it was not the best fight card, and these prelims are pretty good. So I think the prelims will do good. I think the pay-per-view will do average 200 to 300 because they lost the Nurmagomedov and Ferguson main event. If that would have went on, I think it would have been maybe 500,000. And the main reason I think it's going to do poorly is, you know, the economy, people not having money. and you don't legally, you don't really, legally, you don't really have the option to have people all come into one person's house, so because of social distancing. I think that's really going to affect it. And, you know, no bars, having it another big downer. So it'll do okay. It won't do fantastic.
Got it. But we're kind of talking about it just needs to be on for Endeavor and the USC. I also have some questions. If anyone else, please chime in with any, like USC. I kind of want to talk sports in general in COVID to get your ideas. I'm curious, like, especially how the UFC is handling this different. Does anyone have any more? Because I'm going to go off. Okay, so Jason, I think I sent this to you on Twitter or something, or I asked you because I'm a university. And let me tell you, I get emails every day because we are scared. You know, we're up there, like every university is like Endeavor because we've lost, I think when the Wall Street Journal, I think it was, or Boston Globe did an article saying that universities have lost 23 billion in revenues because of just being locked down. 15% less enrollment is expected right now. It's uncertain what's going to happen in the fall. And we've talked about, these are the scenarios that are going around. Everyone has contingency plans, whether schools will open late. You know, first, if there's testing, that would help everything, but it's highly unlikely that we could test that many people by then. But schools may open late. They might start virtual, open late. They might hold it in November, even January, and start the semester then, or just be virtual. And so then there's a lot of conditions on that. I have a couple juniors who told me there's no way I'm doing my senior year from my house. You know, I'm going to get out of here. You know, and so universities also, they need this revenue from tuition. And, you know, and another thing I'm going to add on to that is a lot of schools, especially Big Ten, I'm thinking, get money from their air rights of their football games. And we already see, I think it's Purdue University keeps on saying we are opening no matter what. And you know, you wonder where the motivation is there. What do you guys think is going to happen in terms of collegiate sports?
That is a very good question, because not only are student athletes affected, these huge, as you alluded to, these huge television contracts that they have with networks are affected. You know, it's hard for me to envision the SEC saying, you know, we're going to cancel their games until, you know, further notice. You know, there is going to be a huge influential push to bring back collegiate football. And therein lies another issue, because we have this whole question about whether or not the collegiates can prosper from their naming rights, but yet you're going to send them back out there, you know, free of charge to entertain and make money for the universities and the networks. It's a huge issue. You know, here, the University of Washington, the University of Oregon, they've up here in the Pacific Northwest, they've already said they're going back in the fall in person. So there is a huge push by universities and also, I'm sure, the athletic departments to open up back again. So you can, of course, the circumstantial evidence once again goes back to it's the money. They want the student athletes to produce the college football Saturdays. They will still lose money because they probably won't have, you know, they won't have people in the stands in some of these areas, probably most as safeguards. But, you know, at least they can fulfill their television contracts.
Yeah. Trent, do you have any, I know this is not your MMA lane, but I'm curious what your thoughts on.
My concern is, and I don't know if this has been brought up, but I think I read that it had been, bringing back the athletes while not bringing back the students.
It has been brought up.
And I think that's probably good for the athletes, because it gives them another way to say, we need to be paid. Because if you bring back the athletes and not the students, well, then you're saying these folks are athletes and not student athletes. And I think that's what I take away from it is it could be good for the folks that are student athletes in that respect. I mean, in a health respect, I'm not so sure. But yeah, I just think if you're going to bring back for sports, you need to bring back everybody and not just the student athletes. And if you do, then they're athletes and not students.
Trent, I think that's really interesting. You know, because we're circling back to when we started this conversation with USADA about how, you know, we have these kind of false narratives that we kind of believe, you know, but then when a crisis happens, we're like, this is the real deal. You know, student athletes, yes, they're students, but they also are a big, you know, revenue maker for these schools, and they do get treated differently. And
Essential workers, right?
Essential workers, right?
Yes.
So we might see the facade. I'm not saying it because I don't want to, you know, but this is a viewpoint that the facade of the student athlete is dropped because they realize we need this to continue. There are some colleges, I mean, obviously not as powerful as an entrenched as Ohio State or, as you say, University of Washington, that have already folded, that were already kind of on a risky kind of in debt with lower enrollment. So yeah, no, Jason, what do you think?
In terms of, I'm sorry.
Student athletes, could we just decide they're, as Trent
Oh,
did?
well, you know, it's already for a lot of student athletes, it's a facade that they're also students. I mean, it should be like Trent said, athlete students, because they are. I mean, you could just talk to student athletes. They're a lot of times their classes are picked for them. If there is a subject or a major that they want to go to, they are either dissuaded from doing it because it conflicts with practice, or they're told they can't do it. So that therein lies an issue. Obviously, the old argument is that, hey, these guys get a free education. It's, you know, they get free, you know, they have apparel, they have their they have free meals, you know, they're unlike college students, they don't have to worry about where that's coming. But the trade-off is they really can't have a say as to what's going on. And then we get to this, if they do feel, what happens if they don't feel comfortable, you know, going out and playing during this pandemic? Like, what if it, you know, goodness, what if it gets worse, but they're said, hey, you got to play. But what if you're like, I don't want, I'm scared, I don't want to die just because I'm the starting wide receiver for the team. But my coach is telling me, and I don't want to lose a scholarship. You know, that's the situation.
I think like moments like this, a lot of these scenarios that we're talking about never envisioned.
Yeah.
And you know, there might be still something that the schools realize. And I'm not saying, by the way, that student athletes are getting cushy ride. Some of my best students are athletes. I do acknowledge that they have more responsibility that is put on them than other students. And I think that is something we try not to acknowledge, because they're students. They're, you know, when alumni donations also are a big deal for universities. They want to envision, oh, that's me that is out there playing. You know, I'm connected to this. So it'll just be interesting to see if we have some of these, you know, I think, Brian, you were saying codifications that they might be shifting, or, you know, the curtain is dropping because of necessity. So, you know, this is all so fascinating, and it's playing out in real time. So it's interesting. You know, I want to give any last thoughts to anything, and please tell, because I'm going to show this to my students and any other in the public who want to watch it, please tell us again your podcast and how people can look you up. But I really think I tell my students, I'm usually afraid and nervous on any fight week. We got the weight cuts, we've got, injuries that, so if this happens, I'm already like, I'm probably 70% it'll happen, but that's just skeptical Professor Kidder. So, but so Jason, can you tell us again, your podcast and where people can reach you?
Oh yeah, so MMA Payout is where you could reach me, MMApayout.com. You could get the book on Amazon, MMA and the Law. You could find me, there it is. Yes, and then Twitter, I'm at Dilettaunt, DILLETAUNT. So, and Nancy, thank you very much for having me. I want to also just say that we are MMA fans. We're not here to bring down the sport by any way. We're just fans, and we always, as media people and as people that see behind just behind the sport, we want to make sure that the health and safety of everyone is ensured. So that's why, sometimes it may seem like we're being negative, but we're really not. We're just asking the appropriate questions.
No, we have skills of inquiry that we're using.
Yes.
And
yes.
so I'm trying to think of the right word. This has been like, such like I told you, this is like a dinner party. Like this has been a delicious conversation because I get to ask the people who know more than me and really understand it. So yes, this is not trying to bring anything down. I'm just asking. Brian, you're in my screen. Can you remind people about your podcast and where they can find you?
Sure. So you can just go to briansiskind.com and it'll kind of jump you to all the different things in terms of art fight podcast or film work or creative marketing work, whatever, all the other things that I do. So just briansiskind.com will get you there, or you can follow me at Those Drones on Twitter or at Art Fight Podcast. And thank you guys. I mean, really, this is a gift. I really appreciate everybody's insights, and Nancy, of course, you're always the MVP. So thank you.
Just the host of the party. Yeah, thank you. Stephane, do you want to tell people about
where to find me? Well, on Nancy Kidder's Zoom class. Mostly, I mean, this is I do not generate my own content, although I'm very interested in Brian's microphone brand because the sound is terrific.
It is.
Just for offline, we'll connect and I'll ask you that. And no, it's eye-opening for me. I mean, I know very little about America, although I lived there. I'm from Europe. MMA in my country, my native country, was still illegal a month ago. So you can imagine when I look at this ecosystem of lawyers and regulators and podcasters, when our first generation of journalists are not even born yet, because it was meant to go legal right when the pandemic started. So MMA in France still has not happened. So for me to be with you guys is like taking a fast track to the future. So really enjoyed the conversation.
Well, then whenever this happens, when UFC Paris happens, can we all meet together?
Yeah, yes.
We'll talk about the journey.
I mean, I had so many plans around it this year. It was meant to be right now, more or less, like the first event in France ever. Francis Ngannou was supposed to headline potentially, and all of this now is up in smoke. So let's see. Someone pushed the reset button. We don't know what the next 6 months are going to be like. So.
Oh, it'll happen though. It'll happen. Thank you. And
Thank
Trent.
you, everyone.
It's easiest just to, you can follow me on Twitter, which it's just Trent Reinsmith, or Bloody Elbow. Usually posts 1 or 2 things there a week. The podcast and the newsletter are Come On Now and at Substack. So that's free. And I just want to thank you for having me and me and Jason, and it's been fun.
Yeah, it was nice meeting you in person, Trent. Thank you.
Yeah.
Great. And so your Twitter followers get in trouble. Everyone here, Trent, Jason, Ryan, Stephane, you say you don't,
Not yet. I'm learning every week from you, so why not?
But if you get in trouble because it's been leaked that the UFC is worried about being sold, or you know, or what other crazy stuff we brought up, blame me. Hitter came up. So, but no, but I'm sure I'll follow you guys this whole week as we go into it. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Nancy, for the time.
Let's
Appreciate
meet
it.
at the fight. Let's meet at the fight over the
Yes.
weekend.
Yes.
Weekend, or yes, a weekend.